Hello, and welcome to the Southcoast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more.
I'm going to welcome you to our podcast. You're our first jeweler. I want to get those terms straightened out, but before we go that far, your name?
Don Hoaglund.
Okay, is Hoaglund. A lot of people actually look at me funny when I say this. Is Hoaglund pronounced correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, it wasn't. You know, a lot of people have last names, and because they've been anglicized or whatever.
Well,
so
it has been.
And sometimes
been Americanized.
Sometimes it's kind of funny. Is it Hoaglund?
Oh, sure, we could. Norwegian. That's how they say it over at
really
my mother-in-law's.
Good guess. So, Don, what I was talking about terms is: are you a goldsmith, a silversmith, a jewelry maker, a jewelry craftsman? That's like an occupation that has must drive you crazy. It's like,
well, I do all those things as a. It's often hard to describe when somebody asks you what you do, because you kind of have to have some input from them on what it is that they're expecting. And so, what I do is it has a range, and I wrote down all of the skills that I've acquired in the years that I've been doing this, and I filled a whole entire page. Considering the different types of situations that I've been in. I've done work in manufacturing. I was with an international jewelry manufacturer as a master craftsman for about 10 years over in Rhode Island. And of course, I've been a businessman as well. So it's you can imagine the range of skills, and my customers have come to my patrons, clients. That's also a little ambiguous.
Exactly.
So what you call the person that requires your skills.
Yeah.
And I kind of, like I say, have to sort of have some idea of what these folks are expecting, and I think quite early in my career I took the attitude that yes, I can do that, and so I've worked on projects that obviously from gold wedding rings, gold engagement rings, diamonds, and very high-end types of jewelry forms. As well as other small objects. I'm attracted to small things, even in other work that I do. Like I'm also a painter.
See, I didn't know that about you.
That's how I started in the art field, in my education of art.
Well, let's stick with that for now. Well, where did you go to school?
UMass.
Okay, was it SMU, SMTI back then?
It was New Bedford Tech.
Whoa, you really go back.
Thanks.
Who was the chair of the department? Do you remember? Was it Ed Tanieri?
No. I didn't meet Mr. Tanieri until after I was in the service. I was in the Coast Guard during the Vietnam era. Got out of that in 1970 and returned to what was then. I believe it was SMTI in Dartmouth. They had that one building out there, and I approached. At New Bedford Tech, it was Margot Neugenbauer and
I had her for a jewelry instructor.
And Mr. Booth, who I believe was a staff artist for Standard Times.
Okay.
As well.
Do you remember his first name?
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And that's part of this whole thing, is bringing these people back from the dead. I know it sounds crazy, but
No, I understand.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so I I returned. Before I went into the Coast Guard, I guess that was in '66. I had thought that art would be a career for me, but I really wasn't able to nail it down to exactly what it was that I should be doing within art, and so I gravitated towards painting, knowing that they did when I got out. I'd have some sort of educational opportunity within my means, and so I studied all the time that I was in the Coast Guard, and I began to feel more and more comfortable and began to accumulate terminology and through my studies and with the dictionary here and the art book here and art theory, and so I returned to SMTI and in the painting department, and I had been painting all along whenever I'd had time when I was in the service. And so I had accumulated pretty good skills as far as the materials of art painting in particular. And
who were your instructors, if you don't mind me asking?
Tonieri, Frank McCoy.
Was Herb Cummings there at the time?
Yes. I think he was the head of the department, but I never had him as an instructor.
And it was probably too early for Elliot. Elliot didn't come in until...
Elliot was there, yes.
He was there?
Elliot was there.
Okay.
I remember we had a sophomore review or something like that.
He was brutal.
He didn't... it was very insightful.
Yeah.
It was a help for me to have his input. And so... But
wow, we were schooled by the same four
group.
Guys, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was having been kind of nailed down in the service. I was wanting to expand myself and kind of free up myself, and I was thinking that I began thinking about a career in the future, and so I looked around at my class and I noticed there were 20 or so people in this class who were all painting majors, and I imagined that in a few years these painting majors were going to graduate and go out into the world and be painters, along with myself. However, at the time, I still am, I was married and I had a child. And so making a living seemed to be something that, since my wife, she wanted to stay close to her family here in the city, and I needed to find something that I was going to be able to have as an income.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just as a means of that, I took up scrimshaw, and we did well with the scrimshaw. I did a lot of things, and we were able to travel, and in this travel, we met people who were running their own shops. Primarily, time to time, we would get an account that was like a major account, like a Long Jewelers in Boston. And we would meet with different people in different kind of. Someone was a merchandiser, someone was a silversmith, somebody was a leather worker, and in those days it was the crafts were in a major resurgence. So in our travels, I kind of was able to acquire a journeyman's. Excuse me. A journeyman's kind of education, and of course I continued with the scrimshaw, and I also that's when I took my first jewelry making class with Margot, and it was in the basement of that number one Group 1 building, and she showed me how to solder. I went, oh, I can do this. This is just the 1, 2, 3, and it took off. I had a drawing table in my house, and I had a Bernzomatic torch and a little asbestos pad, and I'd started. Well, I can do that. Can you do this, Don? Oh yeah, I can do that. And we developed this. My wife, in particular, and I developed a jewelry party plan, and that involved going to people's homes. It was kind of like Tupperware.
Yeah, exactly.
And we had invested in I had it in a basket, but they were agates. They were polished agates, and most of them were about the size of a lima bean. And we would bring them to the parties, and the women in particular were there, and they would go through it, and it was delightful. They had such a great time looking at these stones, and then they'd choose a stone, and I would set it in a ring or a pendant or whatever the person. And in the meantime, there were other people who wanted much more elaborate pieces of jewelry, and my motto was, I can do that. So it kind of went from there. And so my son became school age, and traveling kind of had to be curtailed. And so we decided that we would, this is around the time that we bought our house on 7th Street, where we would open a retail type of operation. And it didn't work. It was just, it was too obscure, and we didn't have the funds to put into major advertising the ways that a business should have. And we really didn't want to take on a lot of debt for it, because is it going to work or not?
Exactly.
So we kept up with our parties and different kind of things. People would come in with different kinds of jobs here and there. And of course, I was keeping up with the wholesale work that I had been doing. And we decided to, the vault building, which is now the New Bedford Art Museum, was being renovated by a group. And they were going to, their plan was to put a restaurant in the basement. The first floor was going to be shops, sectioned off shops, and the third floor was to be the offices. And so I had gone down and just went in on a whim, and there was a space available that was perfectly suited for our needs. It was the vault that is the very end of the first floor. And it had security, and it was a vault. The walls were 1 inch thick, so we figured this might be this might be something that would work, and it did. It introduced us to, because the place was new, I believe, we began to have people coming in from all over the country and saying, "Wow, this is Bedford's going to be it's doing great here."
Yeah, that was the old New Bedford 5, right?
No, it was called not Merchants. It was called. I'm sorry, I forget.
I'm sorry. I thought it was New Bedford 5 because my old next door neighbor, Mr. Greaves, was I think the last president of that bank.
Oh, that's Greasy Luck now.
Okay.
That's around the corner.
All right.
They've got a terrific facade, by the way.
Yeah, the Art Deco, yeah.
We were right on the corner of William and Pleasant.
Yeah, that was one of my dad's accounts, because the vault was a restaurant. They had the restaurant, and then after that it was Dillinger's. And it just seemed, for some reason, it was a great concept, and Dave Nelson had his bookstore in there.
That's
I think
right.
he was one of the
That's
partners.
right, yeah.
Paul Pearl, there's another name.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That's
Paul
coming out of my
Pearl
head.
was a construction guy.
Let me go back a little bit. 1776. So was that the name of the place up in Boston where we'd get the gemstones?
Oh, no, that was 1766 house.
1766.
And that was
okay.
that's in Uxbridge.
Okay.
And they are now more commonly known as Statura. Statura
Statura.
Company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they've got gems there. They've got all kinds of anything you want.
It was always a fun trip.
That's where we got the agates.
Yeah, yeah. Pegasus. When did that come in?
Well, that was
the name
that
Pegasus.
was as we were preparing to move to the vault. Excuse me. We need a name. And one of the things that we thought was, well, perhaps this will turn into something, roll down the line, turn into something that's a valuable entity. And so we started, what do you do? How about this? How about that? And no, that's, no, too much. How about Donald Hoaglund? No, because if it does turn into something, maybe it would be a valuable thing someday when we're going to retire. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking, I had an interest in constellations and the stars and celestial kind of events. And I had a Starfinder book, and I went through it. And of course, it was also mythology interested me as a subject. And we found Pegasus, and I was like, Pegasus, Pegasus, yeah. And so that stuck, and it seemed to work well. It was things that we found out afterwards. Yes, Pegasus is often a indicator of artistic endeavors, or a promoter, like as a patron, or that type of thing for artists.
I thought you were going to tell me you rolled up into a mobile station and went, "Oh, wow, what a great idea!" That was the old brand for mobile.
For mobile, yeah. That's right. I had a fellow student in painting, and he decided to do some very realistic paintings of different mundane subjects, and one of them was a landscape, so to speak, but it was the landscape of a garage bay in a mobile station. And so we wound up doing a trade for that. I've got that painting with the mobile horse.
And one more question, because right now you're in a vault, and I know you went down William Street around the corner. Was that Cartier's at one time?
The corner. No, it was an optometrist, or I don't remember his name, but he was there for a long time. And
because I know we had like Cartier's. We had a couple of other like high-end jewelers in the city at one time. Yeah. Alan Scott, does that ring a bell?
Yes, sure, certainly.
That's a sad story.
Yes, it is.
He was a scrimshander as well.
Yes.
He was in my class.
Yes. Oh, is that right? Yeah.
And then it probably wouldn't be good for this podcast, but after we're done, I'd like to ask you about what happened, because I want to verify him. He was a couple of easels over for me, being a Green Beret Special Forces. Yes. My God.
Yeah.
My God. But what a craftsman. I can still see him and Marie with a baby. Mary with a pram, and
son was Travis.
Travis, yeah.
Travis, who we've seen. Travis is he's doing quite well for himself.
Good. That's another story. But I was just sort of curious. So now you're in the vault, and how did that go?
Excuse me. Well, from the vault building closed. Excuse me. And so we were forced to find another location, and luckily it was right around the corner.
Would you like some water? It's not a problem. Yeah, let me get some. God bless editing. Cut out all the crazy parts. There you go.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah. Oops. So it was just, in fact, is it Allison Wells is in that place now, right? Or is okay? Yes. It is Allison Wells. Yeah.
I went in and I single-handedly I tore the place apart and rebuilt it, and I did all my casting there. We were there, I think, probably 7 years. And it was a delightful beginning. It was in the first early days of Freestones, and so we were a community in the downtown area. And one of the things was we always believed in the downtown area to be in a resurgence, which it is, but some things take a little longer than you hope, and so it wasn't always great, and there were problems as well. But we managed to establish ourselves as a ongoing business where we could be I could be approached to do any kind of jewelry, from baby spoons to tiaras, if that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
And as time went by, I became a little bit restless I didn't feel that we were moving forward quickly enough. And my dad had a big Pontiac, and he was moving up in automobiles, and he said, "Would you like to have that Pontiac?" He says, "Give me $1." And I got the big Pontiac, and it gave me mobility. And so I picked up the Providence Journal one day, and I read an ad that jewelry instructor needed at the Jewelry Institute in Providence, which was set up by MJSA, Manufacturing Jewelers and Silversmiths of America. And I answered the ad, and I was hired. And I was hired to teach general jewelry making in the beginning. And I had about maybe 6 hours a week. And that was great for me because I still had customers that I could refer, no longer had the store, but customers that I could refer to my studio at the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I taught at the Jewelry Institute for about a year, and I went from the 6 hours to about 50 hours.
Wow.
I was teaching day and night, and I taught jewelry making. I taught model making. I taught jewelry repair, and those were the night classes. Lots of folks wanted to know. The jewelry was becoming more and more popular, gold, and it become replacing all the silver, turquoise kind of jewelry. People moving into the gold. What else did I teach? I also taught masterclass for MJSA in model making, and actually I was requested by the students. It was very flattering. And so towards the end of that year, I had imagined that I'd just be going along and as the school. And a friend of mine, he was in the yacht business, and I think he was more like a salesperson for Cape Dory up in Taunton. And he gave me a call one night, and he said, "Oh, Don, I've had a customer here today. He's buying this terrific. It was a great deal." And I asked him what he did for a living, and he said, "Well, I'm a jewelry manufacturer." And his name was Steve Morgenstern. And I had made my friend a ring, a gold signet ring, and he showed it to Steve, and Steve said, "Wow, that's a nice job." He says, "If you can do that, I'm looking for somebody." I said, "Ask him to, if he wants to leave the school, tell him to come by and see me." So I had been hoping for a raise at the school, but this was not forthcoming. And so I decided, well, nothing to lose here. Let me go see what's going on, because part of the reason that I left New Bedford was I wanted to see the world of jewelry anyway. I wanted to get more and more experience in different parts of it. And he showed me around the factory, and we had about maybe 14 people working there, and it was beautifully, newly set up in a big cinder block building in Johnston, Rhode Island. And we went in the office after this kind of interview and the tour of the factory. And he said, "Well, how much are you making?" So I said, "Oh, this," I told him how much I was making. And he grabbed his calculator and he did it like this. And he said, "How'd you like to make this much?" And so it was kind of like, "Oh, give me 1 minute to think about that." And so it was quite an experience, going from being a craftsman, one person at one bench, or maybe more, helpers. I would have helpers. I would have apprentices as well. And going from that to going to work in the manufacturing field, where a lot of it was same thing day after day, and it was not my idea of where I wanted to go in jewelry business, but it was an excellent salary.
Yeah,
and so I continued, but I got the Providence Journal a couple of times a week and searched the ads, and I went on interviews. I was going every week of the year. I was going on interviews at different places, and so in a way, even though none of them were able to match that salary, I got experience with all these folks that were had been maybe born into the industry, and it was a terrific experience. I also got a lot of freelance work, my model making, and different things like I did some things for one company. They were pewter casters, and they had a commission with a museum or a number of museums to make small busts of JFK. So they didn't have a model for it. So, can you make the bust? And so I went home, made the bust, and cast it in bronze, and they used it to make their molds for the pewter. And after that, it was Ben Franklin and several other different things that I made for them, globes and things that came apart. And that was an exciting part of my time that I spent over there in Rhode Island. Of course, I did not like the commute.
Well, it was horrible back in. It's bad now. It was horrible then. It's really.
It was.
I guess you could say it's a little bit better, but it's still. Well, you've got. I don't even want to get into the driving practices.
Well, those days, though, 70 miles an hour was fast.
Yeah.
It's not like today.
Now, of all the places in the world you could have landed, so to speak, or hung around, it's almost like a triangle: Attleboro, Taunton, Providence. They're the Silver City, Taunton, Attleboro, Balfour's still there, I think, Johnston's, and then Providence itself, and then their connection to the Italian goldsmithing and jewelry. There's deep connections there because of the Italian heritage there.
Yeah. Well, the jewelry district has been what do they call it?
National Register of Historic Places thing?
It is, yes, but it was upgraded to, what do they call it? Gentrified, I think, gentrified. And with the restaurants and much more, it's much more friendly to average people. And of course, it's kind of an entertainment center now. But the stories were that the new building that I was working in at the time, one day, in precious metal business, everything has precious metal involved in it, whether it's the vacuum cleaner bag or the bench or even the woodwork. So boss and I were talking one day, and I mentioned something about refining, because that's a big industry over there, and there's a number of refiners that you can take everything from paper towels and vacuum bags, like I said. he said, well, our business originally was on over in the jewelry district, and it was on the 4th or 5th floor. And my friend owns a refinery down here down in Cranston. And he said, when the landlord came to us and said he was going to make the place into condos and we had to get out, I was kind of at wit's end and didn't know what we were going to do. And we were cleaning up some scraps, and my friend sent his team in, and they decided to do some test drill holes in the floor because the company had been there for 100 years. He said, well, you see this building that's around you right now? Yeah. You see my Mercedes out there and my wife's Mercedes out there?
No.
And you know that yacht that your friend sold me? And he said, that all came from the floor.
My God.
We took the floor up, replaced it with a plywood floor, and it was, in code and everything, and they burnt the floor. And they yielded.
All
the gold that had been fallen over all those years. A little splash of plating solution, or the dust grinder.
Oh yeah,
around,
yeah, the polisher too.
Polishing, and a lot of companies over there. They were very, very aware of their scraps, and so when you come in, you just walk in. When you go out, it's almost as bad as airport security.
Really?
Because you get dusted off, you get wanded, you got to go through the portal.
Yeah.
And then your shoes get vacuumed, and any way that they can. One place I went on an interview was, I think it was called Imperial Pearl. I went on several interviews to meet the higher up guys, and they show them what I did, and so on the first 2 or 3 interviews, I went in the front door and went out the front door. Mm-hmm. On the third interview, I was told, well, you got to go around the back, the employees' entrance. So I went in the employees' entrance, and it was a waiting room, and there was a guard at a desk, and on the desk was a black box with like a cloth, like a hole in it, mm-hmm. and the hole had like a sewn into like a sleeve, mm-hmm. one of those expandable sleeves in a jacket.
Right.
And so I sat there for a while, and the person I was supposed to meet was like, they were busy with a phone call or something like that, and I was sat waiting. And I said to the guard, I said, what's the box all about? She said, come here and check this out. So she opened the box, and in it were these clothespins. And all of the clothespins were natural color except for several that were red. So I said, oh, that's interesting. What does this mean? She said, well, this is the exit for all of the employees. And when you're leaving, we require each employee to reach into the box and take out a clothespin. If you get a natural colored clothespin, you can leave. But if you get a red clothespin, you're searched. So it was a means of control. Easy enough. The little tiny things, it's easy enough to put them in your pocket or something in your shoe. And some of the stories that I heard from the guys that I worked with over there were like, they did that.
Yeah, I always wonder because I know, having Margot as an instructor, and I remember, cutting, and have your bench, your vise, and you're cutting, and there was like a little canvas thing that held all the dust because she was saying this is not sawdust. This is valuable stuff. In your time in Rhode Island and such, did you ever run across a gentleman named Tim Doyle? He was a layout artist. He did a lot of the jewelry catalogs back in the day.
No.
Okay, I was just sort of curious. Were you also a part of the Massachusetts Apprenticeship program at any point?
No, I was a member of the Cultural Council.
The Cultural
the
Council?
Bedford Cultural Council, yeah,
Right.
Under Rosemary Tierney's administration.
Yeah, because I know from a furniture maker that I once knew that the state did have an apprentice program for craftspeople. And let's get back to that, back to terms and such. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of art in jewelry making, as well as craft. Could you your definition of art versus craft? Because I mean, jewelry making goes back what thousands of years.
Yes, sure, probably.
One of the earliest art forms, probably.
And technology. Excuse me. The lost wax process probably is probably 12,000 years.
Could you explain
BC.
what lost wax is?
Sure. Lost wax process is, I believe it's called Serre Perdue, I think that's French.
Yes,
And the concept is to create a model that would be in this exact shape of the finished product. So if you want a ring, you would take wax and you would create a ring type form.
A little sculpture.
Little small sculpture, sure. And there's, of course, there's industry nowadays. They've come up with all these different kind of blends, and you can get waxes that do all kinds of things. Besides that, there's now plastics that can be used in the same way, because what we do with the wax is we actually embed it in it's similar to plaster of Paris, but it's investment is what it's called, and it has a combination of gypsum and pumice and different, once again, industrially these days here. Nobody wants to make a mistake, especially if it's a model that you've had to sit there for several hours.
And that's beeswax, correct?
No, it's specially formulated
special
waxes for the next phase, which is once it's embedded, we place that. It's like imagine a stainless steel can with no top or bottom on it, and the wax is mounted on a rubber base that this can fits snugly around the base, and we fill it up with the liquid investment, which hardens, same as plaster of Paris. And that, once it's hardened, we take the rubber base off of it and we put it in the oven. And the oven has what's called a burnout cycle, and there's lots of different ways that people treat it. We had one in the factory. Well, in my studio, I do it by eye. I know how long it takes for this, so and so for how many. I can do about maybe as many as 8 flasks at a time in my oven, which is small in comparison to industrial. And so I know how long those take, and then I do adjust my temperatures so that because there's specific temperatures for doing the casting, putting the metal into that. So the heat of the oven melts the wax out and leaves the cavity in the investment of what we want. And when I first began, I was like, well, like, oh, 1, 2, 3, bam, bam, bam. Here you go, and let's see what this does. And my results were less than satisfactory often, because I had to do a lot more finish work on these things to get them to look like what I wanted them to be. And so it's probably best to do your best and most detailed work in the wax. And like I said, there's different formulations of waxes. Some are meant for very delicate structures, and some are meant for more bold and blocky structures, and they handle different ways. And one thing is that imagine a lady's engagement ring that's going to hold a diamond in it. And you want to be able to, I often compare this work to building a bridge. These pieces, like in particular, like let's say a lady's engagement ring that has a lot of open work to it, it has to function very much like a bridge, because whether you realize it or not, you pick up the groceries, or you move furniture, or you get the car door and moving this thing and that thing. This ring flexes. These things flex. They have a kind of like a, you sit on the Tobin Bridge, and you get the bounce, like, and so that was that's part of the making of this model. And so you want to, in order to make it more easy on yourself when you get to the finishing part, you want to complete this as close as possible to what that finished product is going to be like. And they become very, very delicate, because you can imagine the weight of the wax and the weight of the gold. It's factor of 14, so for 14 karat gold. So your wax is zero, basically. And so in order to determine how much material we need, we don't want to waste anything. We don't need more than we need. And we weigh the wax, multiply it by whatever factor, 18. Right now I'm working on a couple of 20 karat wedding bands. And so
is that very soft gold when it's up to 20?
Well, the idea of, I think soft is probably not the best word to use for hardness, although it's, of course, in Britain, 20 karat is a traditional metal for wedding bands. But it, in a way, what we use to test gold is called a touchstone. That's one type. There's electronic ways nowadays. But we use traditionally, it's called a touchstone, and it's a black, either slate or something like that. And we in conjunction with the touchstone, we use test needles, which are a set of little needles, kind of like, remember the spark plug gauges?
Yes,
They fan out.
Yeah.
Well, they each little finger of this has a tip on it that's of a certain carat of gold. So you've got from 24 all the way down to 9. And so you suspect that you've got a ring, let's say a ring like this, which I know is 14 karat. I rub it on the touchstone. Now the touchstone, it actually makes a mark, a lot like a crayon or a pencil. So I think that when it comes to the talking about the hardness or softness of the gold and the carats, it's more like 20 karat is much more easy to make a mark.
Okay.
And so it's not that it's necessarily, I mean, you could probably dent it with a little less force, but still it's a very practical, very sturdy material for things like wedding bands. And
yeah, because I mean, people don't realize that you can use gold, strands or pieces of wire and silver point and gold point. The many drawing to
right,
drawings have been done with that as well. What would you like to be remembered for, or how would you like to be remembered?
I don't know. I guess that's hard to say. I don't really know. I guess I'd like to think that all of the stuff that I leave behind isn't going to get just tossed in the dumpster, and maybe it will be of interest to somebody. And I've done some things that I feel are very valuable as well. That I think that could I keep just things I keep because they were for my own pleasure, probably to make them, and they they represent the way that I think. They represent things that are challenging to me as well. And of all the time that I spend the most making some kind of art form, whether it's painting, which I still paint, whether it's a sculpture, which I've done quite a lot more, obviously.
That's one of the aspects of jewelry making,
difference in size. And I have drawings, and I think through the drawings, I'm most experimental, and I'm able to, somebody just like, it's just
like open up your head kind of thing and just let
let's try this.
Yeah.
Let's try this today, or what happens if I do in the same? I've done drawings like in this manner with this technique, and but something new happens in the most recent one, and it's like, well, I think I might try that again. And so I think that as far as the drawing, because it's not an expensive thing to do, I am able to explore, and I like things like sometimes I'm primarily abstraction in my two-dimensional work.
Okay.
And I do like those. I like sailboats.
Okay.
So
Have you ever exhibited your work?
A little bit. Yeah,
I mean, your paintings and or your jewelry.
Yeah, I have Gallery X. I have.
Okay.
And but pretty much that's about it. Oh, I did. Matter of fact, there was a fella who worked at Cherries down when Cherries was
Cherry and Webb, yeah.
Cherry and Webb, and on the third floor, he would put on art shows along with whatever else was going, the merchandising that they were doing up there on the third floor. And sorry, I can't remember Silva. I think it was Silva.
Louie Sylvia?
It might be, yeah.
Oh, was it mostly scenes of the harbor with whale ships and that?
Oh, no.
Right.
This was this gentleman was an appreciator of the arts.
Okay.
And he felt that he was some manager type at Cherry Webb, and he would display different people's art every month. He'd change up the show, and it was it wasn't like particularly well known as a gallery or anything, but I think that's one of the first places I showed paintings.
Name another jeweler like you, and I'm still having trouble with that term. What are you? Goldsmith, silversmith, jeweler?
All of the above.
All of you. Name another guy like you in town.
Oh, well, he's not in town anymore, but Brad Washburn.
Brad Washburn?
Yeah, Brad Washburn. Once he was trained at Bennett Street School, and he was a caster, primarily casting, and we were great pals. And we would share jobs. My first apprentice was my cousin, and his name's Russell Mello. And Russ Mello has gone on to have a very good business. He works. His work is primarily with other jewelry people selling. Did he have an
office on the top of the towers there?
No.
That's not the same guy. There was a jewelry, a gemologist or appraiser.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name.
Yeah. Okay, I can't even remember the name of the building.
Oh.
But that was a really great. It was Cerulli's Italian restaurant was up there at one time. Yeah. The Regency Towers. I think that's the Regency.
Yes.
And then final question. Do you believe you not only have made a good life, and you've become an institution along with Gallery X, the Star Store, Cherry and Webb, no problemos of all places, Freestones, Arthur the Peanut Store. I mean, do you believe that you've carved out a little niche or left a little bookmark in the history of this area?
Well, I guess that I do. I have folks that I've worked for generations of people doing different things, and they come back and they. Although I think in my own mind, it's I'm like it's just my job.
Just your job.
It's my job, and I want to do it well. I want to make objects that are going to function, going to be beautiful, and it's been kind of my privilege to have been able to fit in. Hasn't been easy.
Great.
It's to be an artist in New Bedford without any kind of affiliation to schools or income. Although I've been fortunate, I've had I still do lots of jobs for other jewelers, all the way over to Providence, and. That is a community
in itself.
And I do feel that I have a lot of respect in that community.
Great. Well, Don Hoaglund, thank you so much. Master jeweler.
Thank you, Ron.
I'm Ron Fortier, the host of this podcast. Until the next time, thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.